Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Ruffman. I am your host, John Ruffman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and I'd like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. There is so much in the news to talk about, but I want to focus for a moment on Ukraine and the talks that are going on now between the United States and Russia on resolving the Ukrainian crisis. The most important single observation I can make is that Ukraine is not present. And in order for any deal to be done, there has to be participation by the Ukrainians. Now, this morning, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States, indicated, of course, Ukraine will be involved, but they're not involved now. And they need to be involved from day one. I believe it does not help when Donald Trump says, okay, but the United States wants a piece of the action. That is to say, mineral rights in Ukraine. Are we an imperial power, or are we a power that is mediating a crisis between Ukraine and Russia? And that's really the question, isn't it? Because one thing is clear. You cannot have an imposed settlement, an imposed agreement by Russia and the United States on Ukraine. Zelensky has made clear, President Zelensky, I should be more formal, President Zelensky has made clear that no imposed settlement will be acceptable. That, in fact, what has to happen is Ukraine's participation and buy-in to any deal that is done. And it's not just Ukraine that is disturbed. The Europeans are disturbed. In fact, we now know that the Europeans are planning to meet independently to try to define what their role should or should not be. Now, let's be clear, the Europeans are not being included in the discussions that are taking place now. And yet, we know that the Europeans have a vital interest. The Europeans understand that if Ukraine goes, or if a deal is cut dealing with Ukraine that does not meet all of the needs of all of the participants, that the Europeans may be in trouble. After all, the accusations continue to fly that Putin wants to recreate the Russian Empire. Yeah, the Soviet Empire, call it what you will. We know that whether ruled by Tsar or Commissar or Putin, that Russia has imperial designs. And they're completely understandable from their point of view. After all, the Russians faced invasion 3 times in the 20th century. And indeed, the Soviet Union was viewed as a buffer to protect them. And part of the Soviet Union's whole approach was the importance of Ukraine, which I would remind everyone has been traditionally the breadbasket of Europe. But the Soviet Union is gone, and the Soviet Empire cannot be recreated. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, which no longer exists as a country, it's now the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. So what we're talking about here is really a deal dealing with Ukraine. Now, how do we get a deal? I would suggest to you that it's important to have all of the parties, including the Europeans, seated at the table. And most important, the Ukrainians have to agree. Zelensky has indicated that he is prepared to continue the struggle no matter what. And I would point out to you that President Trump is now challenging whether or not there should be new elections in Ukraine because, as he pointed out, the popularity of Zelensky is low. I think it is important to understand that Zelensky, at this point, is a national hero. He has led the resistance to the Russian occupation of portions of Ukraine. And the imperial designs that clearly Vladimir Putin has have to be rebuffed. How will this all factor in? Well, one thing is clear. The basic parameters laid down by the Russians have already been accepted by the United States, at least in terms of the formal statements being made by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Donald Trump, the President, and even the Vice President has chimed in on this. In order to have a successful resolution of the bloodiest conflict we have seen in Europe since the Second World War, all the parties have to sit at the table. I remarked the other day that this is not Munich 1938. This is not a time when, as we saw in 38, the superpowers of those days, France led by Daladier, Italy led by Mussolini, Britain led by Neville Chamberlain, and, of course, the most tragic of all, the idea that Hitler of Germany would have a say. And they made a deal. They wrote up a deal. And do you remember Neville Chamberlain coming back from Munich and saying to the British people as he landed in Great Britain, "Peace in our time"? Well, a deal over Ukraine that does not include the Ukrainians cannot be peace in our time. And a deal struck simply between Putin and Trump, and that's what we're talking about, a deal between two individuals who both have their own ideas, cannot be imposed on the Ukrainian people. This is something that I learned many years ago. I spoke at a college in Colorado College, and this was back in the I would say it was about 1978, 79. And there was a professor who was a faculty member who was of Ukrainian descent. And we had a long talk, and he said to me, "John, you must understand, Ukraine's passion for its own independence is real, and nothing will be done to stifle that desire." I believe that professor, whose name escapes me today, was absolutely right. And so here is the question. Will Russia and the United States agree to sit together with the Ukrainians, and yes, involving the Europeans, so that a resolution can be found to this crisis? If we do not have an inclusive, everyone signing off on the deal, there will be no peace. And that will mean a lot more destruction and war. The Europeans have said if the United States steps back, they will step in even more decisively. And for Donald Trump to claim that the United States is spending all this money and the Europeans are doing nothing and spending little money is absolute rubbish. We know the Europeans are as concerned as the Ukrainians, and everyone is worried about Vladimir Putin. At least it would seem everyone is worried about Vladimir Putin, except perhaps Donald Trump. So I'm going to watch what happens in Ukraine as an indication of the strength or weakness of our alliances. We'd better be careful. The dream of America and Europe working together and de-escalating tensions with Russia, all of that plays into what is playing out in the Ukraine right now, even as we speak. These negotiations are so critical, so important, and maybe decisive in terms of the future of Europe, America, and Russia. I am John Rothman, and you are listening to advice that I have based on a historical perspective. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World. Make sure to follow along. Let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow. I want to say a special word that you can indicate your agreement, disagreement, whatever you think, by going to LinkedIn, going to Facebook, and of course, you can contact me directly through email. I want to say a special word of thanks to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast. Around the Political World with John Rothman appears every day because of Gogo. All right, I'll be back tomorrow, right here, and we'll see where the world is then.